Good morning. Welcome students to the current video lecture on scales in fishes. The skin of most of the bony and the cartilaginous fishes are covered by the scales. And the scales are enormously in the size, shape and structure, and they extend ranging from rigid armor plates in fishes such as the shrimpfish and boxfish and to the microscopic ones. And the scales are absent in the certain fishes also, such as the eels and anglerfishes. And the morphology of the scale can be used to identify the species of fish from which they came from. And the scales are produced from the mesodermal layer of the dermis, and the same genes are involved in the tooth and the hair development in mammals. They are also involved in scale development, and larger and the heavier scales supply the more protection but resist the movement, while the smaller and the larger scales offer the less protection but allow the greater freedom of movement. Thus, in common eel, Anguilla, the scales are microscopic, and not in all fishes have the scales. In some species, the skin is devoid of scales, for example naked catfish. Then in other species like common eel appear to have the no scales, but they really have the microscopic scales which are deeply embedded in the dermis. And even in those fish that have scales, they do not always cover the whole body, and the size and the distribution of the scales over a fish body often but not always reflect the way it lives. And thus a fish that actively swim will be having, and the fast swimmers will be having, the scales which are microscopic when compared to that of the fishes which is having the larger scales. The scales can be broadly classified. The scales can be classified into into different types based on their structure. They are the placoid scales. Number one, they are the placoid scales. Then the two, the ganoid scales. Then there are the elasmoid scales. Then there are the cycloid scales, and there are the ctenoid scales. Okay, and they have the different morphology, as you can see here in this picture. You can see they are having the different morphology. This is a ctenoid, this is a ganoid, this is a placoid, which is an enlarged view, and there is a cycloid. The ring-like structure gives them the name the cycloid, etc. Then we will see each of these scales in detail. In this elasmoid or the bony ridge type of scales are also called as a cosmoid scales. The first scale is about the placoid scale. These placoid scales are found in the cartilaginous fishes such as the shark, rays and chimeras. They are also called as dermal denticles. They are also called as dermal denticles. Since they are structurally homologous with vertebrate teeth, they can be compared to that of the vertebrate teeth. The skin in the skins will be loaded with the microscopic placoid scales. This placoid scales has a central pulp cavity surrounded by the blood vessels, and it is also surrounded by the conical layer of dentite called as a spine, and a reticular basal plate that rests on the dermis. That structure. Okay, so this is an enlarged view of the placoid scale. A sectional view you can see here. This is a sectional view. This This is a placoid, enlarged view of the placoid, and here the central portion, it is a pulp cavity. This is a central portion, that is a pulp cavity. This portion, it is a pulp cavity. Then it is surrounded by a conical layer. Here this is a surrounding layer, you can see here. This is the center cavity. This is a dentine region, and it is surrounded by the enamel region. So at the center you can see the pulp followed by the dentine, then outermost you can see the enamel. So these are the portion, and it in this picture clearly indicates that it is embedded in the dermis region. Okay, so this is a portion of the skin, this diagram. This is a portion of the skin, and this is the enlarged view of the skin. Okay, then the outermost layer is composed of the vitrodendine. So vitrodendine, a largely inorganic enamel-like substance. The enamel-like substance is also called as a vitrodendine. The placoid scales cannot grow in size, but rather more scales are added as a fish increases in the size. Okay, so each placoid scale on the skin, they doesn't increase in the size, but the number of the scales increases. They do not grow in size, but it increases. And the shark are entirely covered by the placoid scales, and the studies have found that the scales create the tiny vortices which reduces the drag, which makes swimming more effective, as well as a quicker when compared to that of the other types. The most important part is that the amount of the scales coverage is much less in the rays and the chimeras and the rough sandpaper like. The skin appears like this sandpaper like, and it is used for as a source for the shark green. And one of its major applications is the historical manufacture of the hand grip of the swords. So the skin is like a sandpaper like texture of shark, and ray skin coupled with its roughness has led to be the valid source for the product called as a shark green. And the shark green, it is used as a hand grip for the swords. So that's all for about the placoid scale. Once again, the placoid scales are seen in cartilaginous fishes, which belongs to the class Chondrichthyes, and they are also called as a dermal denticles. Then the structure is similar to that of the tooth. It is having when we take a longitudinal section of a tooth, it is having a central pulp cavities surrounded by a dentine and followed by an enamel portion, and the enamel, it is also called as a vitrodentine. Okay, then it appears like a sandpaper like appearance. The presence of this placoid scales on the skin of shark gives a sandpaper like appearance, and it is used as a hand grip in the swords, and that product is a leather source of leather called as a shark green. Okay, so that's all about this type. And there is a cosmoid type of it is a ganoid type of the scales. In ganoid, scales are found in the sturgeon, then the paddlefishes, bowfishes, etc. And they are derived from the cosmoid scales, and with a layer of dentine in the place of the cosmine, and a layer of the inorganic bond salt called as a ganion, known as the ganion, in the place of the vitrodendine. So in placoid scales, the outermost covering, it is a vitrodendine or it is a enamel, whereas in the ganoid it is a ganoin. Okay, the most ganoid scales are of diamond shape. Here you can see the shape here. This is a shape. It is almost a diamond shape, and are connected by a peg and socket joint. As similar of the, it is a type of the fixed type of joint. A peg, and you can see here as some projection is there, and it gets interlocked with the succeeding scale. So it gives a peg and the socket type of the joint. Peg, 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 and socket type, SOCKET, socket type. Okay. So in sturgeon, the scales are greatly enlarged into the armor plate along the sides and the back, and while in the bowfish, the scales are greatly reduced in thickness, resemble to that of the cycloid. So ganoid scales are also called as a rhomboid scales, or simply it is also called as a ganoin. They are heavily diamond shaped. They are heavily diamond shaped, non-overlapping. They are just interconnected as in a sort of peg and socket joint are present. They are the primitive fish like gars. Also you can see this type of ganoid type of scales. Okay, so ganoid scales are slight modification of cosmine type of scales. Okay, so again next type, it is a cycloid type of scales seen in the bony fishes, osteothetes. The cycloids, as you can see, they are the roughly circular. They are roughly circular in structure. Roughly circular, you can see here they are the roughly circular in structure. This structure you can see they are roughly circular and thin flexible overlapping type of. Here they clearly seen that they are overlapping type, and in all the modern bony fishes such as minnow, suckers and trout, etc., you can see this type of scales, cycloid type of scales. And next, before going to the next type, that is a ctenoid type, the cycloid, mainly the teleost fish, you can see the cycloid type, and which comprises majority of the living fishes, and cycloid scales have the smooth margin. They have the smooth margin when compared to that of the ctenoid. They have the smooth margin. While the ctenoid, here you can see the margin, it is not smooth. Here the margin, it is like tenae like. It's like this, tenae like, or regularly rectangular shape. Whereas in cycloid, the scale will be like this. And these scales are almost no bone and being composed of the surface layer containing hydroxyapatite and calcium carbonate, and the deeper layer is composed of mainly of collagen. The enamel on the outer scale types is reduced to the superficial ridges and tenae. Here you can see the ridges and the tenae. And most ray-finned fishes have ctenoid scales along the flat fishes. Some species have ctenoid scales on the eyed side and the cycloid scales on the blind side, while the other species have ctenoid scales in the males and the cycloid scales in the female. So this ctenoid and the cycloid scale. Sometimes in certain fishes, both the scales will be present, maybe in either in the male or in the female, or in the anterior portion or in the posterior portion. So you can see a mixed appearance of cycloid and the ctenoid in certain fishes. And in cycloid, here if you just closely see, here you can see the concentric rings are present. We'll just zoom and see. Here you can see certain concentric structures are the same. Okay, and these are called as a annuli, or the concentric rings or annuli. They are called as a annuli, 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 and are seen throughout the central nucleus region. And this region, the center region here, this region, this is a center region. The center region is called as a nucleus, and there are the lines of these lines of growth. This you can see the certain lines of growth here, like this concentric lines of growth. These lines of growth which indicates the age of the fish, and the grooves or the radii are the found towards the margin of the scales. Okay. One, it is a cosmoid scale, and they are found in the lobed fin fishes, that is the coelacanth and the lungfishes, and are probably derived from the fusion of the placoid scale. This picture here you can see, this is a picture of a cosmoid scale, diagrammatic picture of a cosmoid scale, and they are composed of a layer of dense lamellar bond called as isopedin, made up of isopedin, PEDIN, isopedin, and above which a layer of the spongy bond supplied with the blood vessels are also present. And the bond layers are covered by a dentine-like substance called as a cosmine, and a superficial outer coating of vitrodentine. There is an outer superficial layer of vitrodentine. So this is a vitrodentine. Here you can see the vitrodentine portion, and the scales of the modern coelacanth are modified by the laws of the cosmine layer, while the scales of the modern lungfishes are modified by the laws of the dentine layer. So cosmoid scales increase in the size through the growth of the lamellar bond. So that's all about the cosmoid scales, and we will see the migration of fishes in next video session. Thank you.